We're live.
Welcome everyone to Lecture 4, in which we continue the discussion of a couple of key issues. One of them is syncretism and neutralization. The other is the process of what's called vocabulary insertion. We talked about that last time. Vocabulary insertion is, once the syntax is done, how do you turn a tree into phonology? The idea is that you have a fairly abstract tree which has a bunch of nodes on it, and those nodes, let's call them F, G, and H, are terminals, and we now know that terminals contain a bunch of features, some of which are acquired along the way in the syntax, and others which come in from the formative list, and that vocabulary insertion is a process of inserting exponents, phonological pieces, in order to turn those nodes into phonology and send those on to the next module over. So, and we talked about the fact that vocabulary insertion as a working hypothesis will go bottom up in the tree, that it will start at the bottommost node, insert a piece of phonology there, then go to the next terminal node, insert a piece of phonology there, and go to the next terminal node and insert a piece of phonology there. And at every point, what goes on is the application, or the potential application, of the subset principle. Now, if you remember last time, we dealt with the example of third-person feminine pronouns, and we said that among other things, that for example, the pronoun she would be specified for many features, some of which included case, plus nominative and minus genitive, whereas her would be specified for all of the same features. I'm just going to put a big F there as a stand for the person, number, and gender features, third person, feminine singular. I'm just going to put a kind of cursive F there. But her would contain all of those same features, but nothing for case. In other words, the vocabulary item her is underspecified. In principle, it's compatible with any third person, feminine singular terminal, regardless of its case. It's a wild card, a joker if you like. It can be inserted in any context. Now the question is, if it's a wild card that can be inserted in any context, why don't you insert it in every context? And the answer there is that if you compare the features of her with the features of she, you see that the features of her are a subset of the features of she. And hence, she wins the competition because it is more highly specified than her, and the subset principle says that in the case of two items, both of which are compatible with the features at a particular node, let's say that that node is here, the most specified one, that's compatible of course, wins. Okay, does everyone remember that? You're allowed to ask any questions now. Yeah? So far so good? All right, so the way that I formulated then the elsewhere principle, or the subset principle, I'll kind of use those interchangeably. I shouldn't, but I will. Was to say that if you have, for example, two exponents, call them exponent 1 and exponent 2, and exponent 1, the features on exponent 1 are a subset of those of the features on the terminal in question, and the features on exponent 2 are a subset of the features on the terminal in question. How do you decide which one to pick, E1 or E2? That one stopped?
Yeah. We've got it on this one, it's fine.
Okay. How do you decide which one to pick? You would say that if you have E1, which is a subset of E2, then of course you're going to pick which one? Which one? E1's got a subset of the terminal features, E2's got a subset of the terminal features, and E1 in turn is a subset of E2. Which one are you going to pick?
E2.
E2. Right? E2 is the maximal subset in this case. Good. Now, everything I just said works very well for the case of what are called intrinsic features. The features that are carried by an exponent. But we also discussed the competition that happens, for example, on why you wouldn't say things like childs. You'd say children and not childs for the plural. Those childs. No, those children. Okay. So, but if we look at the vocabulary items in question, let's say that we say that plural number in English is realized by the exponent z, in words like phlebs, nonce formations, but that plural number is realized by, for example, ren, in the context of a particular list in which we might put the specific roots, like kiddo 366, which is for child, and bro 47, which is for, and those will give us, maybe possibly a few others, and those will give us, children and brethren. Okay. Now, the question is, if we look at these two vocabulary items, we know that in the end of the day, the right answer is that ren is going to win the competition. Okay. But does anything that I've written over here guarantee that result? Yes or no? No, because this is talking about the features that an exponent realizes. Well, these are both realizing the same features, minus singular. So in this case, the competition is not decided by the features that the elements bear, but by what? What is it that makes ren more specific than z? The context, okay? So in fact, the subset principle refers not only to which is the more specific vocabulary item, which is the more specific exponents, in terms of the intrinsic feature it bears, but also in terms of the context, okay? You see that very clearly here. Both of these are realizing the same number of features. They're both realizing exactly one number feature, minus singular. But this one, ren, wins because it has a more richly specified, a more specific, a narrower, if you will, context. Okay? So I just want to make that clear to everybody, because last time when we introduced this notion of the subset principle, we talked about it in these terms, specifically sort of, if you like, counting which one realized more features, but in fact, a more general application of it looks at what's a more specific item, independently of the features it's carrying, but also in terms of which one is in a narrower set of context. Yes?
Is there any sort of specific notation for the rule where it's like in every other context, like the first one? Do you know what I mean? Like if you're going to write in this context?
Well, yeah, so in fact, sorry, I should have put here a little underline that meant next to for that one, but for this one, no. In fact, this is an elsewhere, this is an elsewhere item in the sense that you don't even need to specify any context, and that's what makes it so productive, and that's why if you had a word like free, z would go on it, okay? Because there's not even any, no, there is no way to specify in all other contexts, right? That's just inherent in not specifying anything that it's compatible with everything. Okay? Good question. Other questions? So far, so good. Okay. Now, the question is, given everything we've just said here, it should be the case that the most specific exponent always wins. Are there any cases in which a less specified exponent can win? Indeed, actually there are. Some, and we'll talk about. And how can that happen? That shouldn't happen given what we've just talked about. We've just engineered a very specific principle of language which specifically prevents less specified things from ever winning. So if it's true, and I'll show you that it is true, that sometimes they do win, how? Well, the first case to mention is one that we already discussed a little bit in one of the tutorials last time, which was the very interesting case of dialects of English that say things like, I am not becomes, with phonological packaging and politicization, I'm not. And you are not can become you're not. Now, interestingly, when you make a question, you bring the auxiliary to C, and in that case, the politicization is not of the pronoun and negation together, or the pronoun and the auxiliary together, but the auxiliary and negation. So in this case, for example, are not you, no one ever says that. They say, aren't you? Right? So far, so good. Everyone following along? But, am not I does not become am't I. Instead, it becomes aren't I. And that's unusual because it looks like are shouldn't be inserted in the context of first person singular. It should be am't I. But of course there is some problem with am't I. Maybe it's hard to pronounce. It's not that hard to pronounce, I just did. But, you know, there seems to be some pressure against it that we want to formalize. Okay. And technically speaking, if we're to write down the vocabulary items, and we say, for example, that am realizes an auxiliary node, which is, for example, a copula that is present tense and has the features of the author and its participant and is non-singular. And we say that are, I'm going to erase these, that are, let's just do it like that, realizes an auxiliary that's a copula and is non-past, but actually nothing else, because it's used with you are, they are, we are, y'all are, etc., then this should never win. You see that from the formula we had before, if we have a T, which basically, okay, so we had, in the syntax, we had a T node, and we had a subject pronoun, and that subject pronoun was the one that eventually will be phonologized by I, so that thing was plus author, plus participant, minus singular. And then the tense node, which is minus past, in the syntax underwent agreement with it. Subject-verb agreement in English. So copied all of its features and became plus author, plus participant, minus singular. And then that tense node, together with negation, which already seems to have been part of it in some sense, moves to C. And now, when it's time to spell those out, we should look at our exponent list and put in am't. Why do we put in aren't? Okay? This is a case where the wrong thing seems to be winning. A less specified item seems to be winning over a more specified item. Is everyone following along? And there's nothing in the way that we've written the elsewhere principle that will deliver this result. Is that clear? So how do we deal with this? Do you have a question?
I was just going to say, because you say aren't I, but you can say am I not.
Okay.
So it's only in certain context that it's...
Very good, very good. So that's very important. So it's not the case that any movement of an auxiliary that has the features of plus participant plus author to C will automatically lead to this problem. It's something about it bringing along negation. And if you leave negation behind and say, am I not, it's fine. It's something about negation being there. That's crucial. Something about negation being there has somehow mucked things up to the point that a less specified thing is winning over a more specified thing. Counter the principle we've developed. Good. What else? Anything else? Anyone else? There are 4 people here in the audience. Okay. So, here's the solution that I